Welcome to this HIS 4470 lecture entitled Interviewing and Interpersonal Relationships, the Intimacy of Oral History. Remember that oral history interviewing is such an intimate experience that the relationship between narrator and interviewer affects the quality of the interview. Being interested in and paying attention to someone else makes them feel an emotional connection with you and will also warm you up to them. There are three things to consider when thinking about the emotional effects of conducting interviews. The first is that oral history is collaborative. It takes two people or more to make this thing happen, and that creates an interpersonal relationship. The second is that there is a power dynamic at play, but that power dynamic is unequal. The third is that the effects of interviewing linger after the interview. Some of those affect the narrator, some affect the interviewer, and some affect those associated with the narrator. Let's consider how the interview affects the narrator. The interview might give validation to the narrator, especially if the narrator is someone whose words are undervalued, that is, a powerless person. The interview can raise the narrator's consciousness of themselves and of their own lives through articulation of their life story. And it can give the narrator a perspective on events of life that they did not have before. Having your stories actively listened to can be a profound experience for many people, because our usual experience is that people rarely listen to us with care. That is, words fill gaps in silences. Another effect of the interview is that through it, the narrator actively creates meaning. In this case, we're not talking about narrators making sense of their lives, but narrators engaging in an act of creation. They tell a story about themselves. This can be a problem, as the narrator might force incidents of their lives into the framework of the narrative form. This is to say that the narrative form has its own imperatives. It requires a plot, it requires characters, and it requires context. The plot itself has imperatives. It has, for example, an introduction, a midsection in which drama is built up, and a denouement. These things can be problematic when the narrator becomes too focused on the narrative style rather than the truth that they should be trying to achieve. There are other effects that arise as the narrators speak about themselves. It's possible that the narrator will glimpse their own stories through the responses that you give them as the interviewer. They may see a perspective on themselves that they had not encountered before. Narrators might become conscious that they are speaking to the future, thus turning the interview into a mediated source. They might skew their narration because they're conscious of teaching a lesson, or presenting an image, or under or over emphasizing things they want others to know about them. This latter, the under and over emphasis, might occur if the narrator wants to overemphasize the good that they've done or de-emphasize the bad. Again, this is an act of projecting an image rather than accurately presenting the past. Now let's consider how the interview affects the interviewer. The intensity of the close connection that develops during an interview affects the interviewer, that is you, sometimes slightly, other times in large ways. You must be aware of this dynamic. Sometimes your professional empathy is mistaken for friendship. This might happen when the narrator makes a connection you did not intend, and it's entirely possible that you will feel friendship and consequently feel guilty for not continuing the connection or the friendship. After all, it's your job to secure information, but Kant's moral imperative that people are not merely means to your end applies. This is a difficult, morally ambiguous place to negotiate. You must attempt to establish the true nature of the relationship at the outset, both for the narrator and for yourself. But do so in a way that neither hurts the feelings of the narrator, who at the beginning might have no intention of befriending you, thus making you sound presumptuous, nor that disrupts the rapport you want to build. Another effect of interviewing might be that you discover narrators who are stuck in a bad place in their lives and who you feel obliged to aid. Should you confront this problem, beware of the dilemma of becoming overly involved. One person cannot alleviate the suffering of very many other individuals, and often those in dire straits will see you as a means to their own end. As you might well understand, people who are desperate do not feel as bound by Kant's moral imperative as you might. Also in these situations, beware of sacrificing your professionalism to empathy, and of the potential to feel exceptionally guilty because you've grown attached to people you've shared information with. Like Yao, I advise that you must accept your limits. Do what you can, but you cannot fix the problems of the world. A different effect that interviewing might have on you, the interviewer, is that the experience makes you see yourself better because you have articulated your own ideas and in hearing the answers from your narrators. Also, you might be exposed to worldviews and experiences that you did not know existed. This is not to say that some people hold ideas that you can't imagine. They do, but it's much more likely that your narrators will have life experiences unlike any you have had or that you have known about. These will open your eyes to different worlds. There are also some problematic components of interpersonal relationships that might affect its quality. Be aware of these things so they don't take you aback. The most serious is repulsion. You might find your narrator's opinions anathema. They might, for example, be crude, like the lonely narrator who tried to connect to me by showing me his collection of pornography. Now, it's not that I'm particularly prudish, but this was impolite given the shallow nature of our relationship, and for goodness sakes, it was just simply TMI. Narrators might express racist or sexist opinions, or they might have other kinds of opinions that are equally off-putting. In the Deep South, for example, it's not unheard of for a narrator to assume that white interviewers share their racial opinions. Because I am white, I cannot speak for African Americans, but I can speak about this because it has happened to me. These folks may speak unguardedly about their notions prior to adequately testing the waters. This also may not be blatant. Instead, it might be subtle, like a nod and a wink. Don't you know, don't you know? This is not confined to those we consider conservative. It is just as possible, whether in the Deep South or elsewhere, that a political or a racial liberal will assume the interviewer shares their own stance. They might rail against this or that current bugaboo without caring that the interviewer is not simpatico. Regardless, the narrator assumes that you share their likes and dislikes before they've gotten to know you, and this can be off-putting to the point of revulsion. What should you do? I advise that you roll with the punches. Unless they say something so totally outrageous that you simply have to respond, you should remember that your job is to get information. Their opinions represent those of other people as well. And if you can capture the narrator's truth, you can add to our corporate memory of the time and place in which the interview occurred. As Yao reports about the interviewer Anne Phoenix in her third edition, page 195, quote, respondents are not unitary, unquote. And you can focus instead on the parts of the narrator's person and circumstances that you enjoy. Remember, too, that you spend only a limited amount of time with the narrator, and you're not there to change their minds about anything. To try to do so is actually advocacy and is not part of the discipline of the oral historian. Finally, allow me to simply list some other things that can affect the interview dynamic. And I advise you to pay close attention to Yao's discussion of these things that impinge on the quality of the interview. Race and ethnicity can affect the quality of the interview. Class, social and economic class, can affect the quality of the interview. Gender can affect the quality of the interview. Age can affect the quality of the interview. And finally, as Yao notes, cultural norms, which are often indistinguishable from other components like race, class, gender, and age, can affect the quality of the interview. Yao does such a good job discussing these items that I don't believe I can improve through this lecture. With that, we have concluded this lecture, and as always, I thank you for your attention.